There is a significant lack of budget graphics cards these days, which is why I'm glad I found this. The Intel Arc A380. This GPU isn't really available brand new anymore, but I was able to pick this one up for only $80 slightly used. And for a graphics card that is a little over 2 years old, I think that's an amazing deal. But is the performance any good, or are Intel drivers still kind of a joke? Well, let's run it through some benchmarks. But before that, I wanted to let you know I'm doing an all-day fundraising stream this Monday, April 21st at 11 a.m. CST to help raise money for my cat Brownie's surgery. Brownie had to undergo life-saving emergency surgery recently, and while we are so happy he is at home now and recovering, the costs of the procedure were far outside of our reach. So if you have the means to help, I'll drop a link in the video description to the GoFundMe page, or you can come watch on Monday where we will be playing games, talking tech, a few giveaways, and doing challenges in hope to support Brownie's recovery. Thank you. Now, I'm not expecting too much from this graphics card. No 1440p, no ray tracing, but if we can get pretty good 1080p performance, then I'd be happy. One thing to note about this card is that you will need to have a computer that has rebar support, which is generally going to be an Intel CPU from 10th gen or higher, or any of the Ryzen 3000 CPUs or newer. There are some mods out there that enable rebar on older CPUs, but these aren't officially supported, so just do your own research before making any purchasing decisions. We're testing the Arc A380 today, paired with an Intel Core i5-12600KF, which is a little overkill for how much graphics card we're using, but you'll probably see similar results on most officially supported processors out there. Now, it should be noted that this graphics card has a TDP of only 75 watts, meaning it can be used with just about any power supply out there, is not going to draw a lot of power, and is not going to produce much heat. So just keep that in mind when we're going through these benchmarks. And here's the rest of the machine these benchmarks are done on, just for your reference. Let's start with Hitman: World of Assassination. The game engine for this was originally released in 2016, but with each new iteration they've made a few updates here and there, and the game still looks pretty great to this day. The canned benchmark is great in this as it's just an insane amount of particle effects, mostly from explosions, which is so much more intensive than anything the game will throw at you. So if you pass the benchmark, you'll be good to go. This is 1080p resolution, with all the settings to medium and no AI upscaling, and we are averaging around 56 FPS with 1% lows of 42. I personally would call that playable, especially since you'll probably get better performance in the actual game. But if you wanted to get that average above 60, you can always bring the graphics down to somewhere between low and medium and get some more frames that way. Next up, I tried Cyberpunk 2077, which was originally released at the end of 2020. Now, previously, I tried the benchmark at 1080p resolution with settings to be a mixture of low to medium, and the FPS was averaging out to about 47 with 1% lows of 41. Now, this is playable and would be more like a last-gen console experience probably, but if you want a little more oomph, I went back and turned on XeSS 1.3, Intel's AI upscaling software, and I ran the benchmark again. And this time around, we were able to average 61 FPS with 1% lows of 53. A much, much better experience. And while yes, you might see some ghosting here and there if you look hard enough, but I think the frame rate experience is just that much better when hovering around 60, so I would totally recommend it. Still amazing to be able to play this game at all, especially at a frame rate that isn't hovering around 30. Horizon Zero Dawn has a great canned benchmark that runs you through some simple scenes of the game. At 1080p with all the settings to low, I was only able to average 53 FPS with 1% lows of 42. I was really hoping to hit that 60 FPS barrier, but I think there's just too much going on in this game, or it might be the Intel drivers, I don't really know. And unfortunately, the game does not support Intel's AI upscaling software, so this is basically as good as it's going to get at this resolution. If you're okay with bringing it down to 900p, I'm more than confident you'll be able to hit that 60 FPS threshold. Either way, I consider this playable, but not optimal. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth came out within the last few months on PC, and it is a really demanding and beautiful game, so I was not very hopeful here. At 1080p and settings to low, we averaged 38 FPS with 1% lows of 16, and that did include the occasional hiccup here and there. I would deem this under the better than nothing category, but not the best experience for sure. I went through and tried to find ways to make it look better, but without support for XeSS, there wasn't much to be done. Luckily, the game does support dynamic resolution scaling, meaning it can bring your resolution up and down depending on your settings automatically. When I set the maximum resolution down to 66%, which would be 720p, we were able to hit that 60 FPS and 1% lows of 30. The game might not look as graphically impressive, and there were times where textures would just load in as the view distance was reduced, but I still would have no issue playing this game at these settings. To be honest, I'm amazed it works at all. Let's switch over to some esports. Fortnite is more CPU bound and leans heavy on Nvidia cards, but we can try our best. 1080p, DirectX 12, with settings all set to medium, we averaged about 75 FPS with 1% lows of 62. This is totally playable, and I think most people would be fine with it. But a lot of people want like an insane level of frames when it comes to esports, so you can always go to performance mode and rely more on your CPU, and you'd probably get like double the FPS. But I think this looks really good, and I'd have no problem playing at these settings. Another esports game I love is the finals, except unlike Fortnite, it's actually fun. There's just so many particles happening on the screen, so it can be a little intensive. Running through a power shift map at 1080p with all the settings to low and the lighting set to static, we averaged about 78 FPS with 1% lows of 59. Totally playable, and actually above what I expected for this game. If you're okay with 60 FPS, you can turn the graphics up to medium and really enjoy the beautiful scenery this game has to offer. The 1% lows are pretty good as well, so I'd say this is a total win that this game plays so well on this low-priced graphics card. Let's switch over to the world of racing. This is F1 2024, and it's absolutely beautiful. You obviously can't use this game as a baseline for all racing games, but I think it's a good start to see how any modern racing game plays on the graphics card, and then you can do your research from there. In the canned benchmark on Bahrain at 1080p with all the settings to medium and ray tracing set to full blast, just kidding, no ray tracing, we averaged 102 FPS with 1% lows of 85. That is phenomenal performance, and if it were me, I would be cranking those graphics to high at the expense of a little FPS. These numbers might be slightly lower in an open world racing game, considering this is all on a simulated track in F1, but I still think you'd get some amazing performance on most racing games out there. Just don't expect to be maxing out your 240Hz monitors anytime soon. Space Marine 2 is a very intensive game, and before adding this game to the list, I said if it even boots, I'd be happy. And look, it did. I benchmarked this game at a particular part that has thousands of Tyranid on the screen at once, and it really hits that graphics card hard. At 1080p, all settings to low, we averaged only 31 FPS with 1% lows of 20. I mean, playable? Yeah, technically. I'd put this in the better than nothing category, but it feels like you're doing this game a disservice by playing on something that runs this poorly. So while I wish we got some better performance, this might be an actual hitch in VRAM that is holding us back. So just remember that your mileage may vary. Resident Evil 4 Remake fared a little better, but not by much. At 1080p, settings to low, and textures at high 1 gig, we were only able to average 42 FPS with 1% lows of 35. If you drop the graphics down a little bit, you could probably get some better frame rates, but in terms of graphics, this is the best you're going to get on this card. It's better than nothing, but this start of the game doesn't have much going on, so it's very likely you'll have slightly worse performance throughout the intensive parts of the game. So give it a shot, but expect very little, so you'll have a happy little surprise at the end. Red Dead Redemption 2 time, baby. This game still looks amazing, and I love adding it to every benchmark I do. With the canned benchmark at 1080p and all settings to medium, we averaged 77 FPS with 1% lows of 47, so not a bad little turnout at all. Those averages are in line with what I expect out of a single-player game, and there's enough headroom to where we can play with the settings to go higher or lower depending on your personal frame rate experience. This is fantastic to see, and I'm really glad we weren't bogged down by the GPU. And to round out our benchmarks, we're going with the newest esports game out there, Marvel Rivals. Now, I originally wanted to run the game at 1080p with all the settings set to low, just to get a baseline, but the game kept crashing, saying I was running out of VRAM, which is fair, considering this is a brand new game and this card only has 6 gigs. So I went ahead and told Marvel Rivals to optimize my settings, and it kept everything at low, but changed some of the lighting settings that apparently helped the performance of lower end machines. And then I finally got it going. And honestly, this looks amazing. At 1080p, everything to low, global illumination to SSGI, and XESS sets performance, we were able to average 75 FPS with 1% lows of 54. And the game looks great. I thought that XeSS would make this have heavy latency and look all smushy, but honestly it looks pretty sharp. I am very pleasantly surprised. Now if you're a high-end sweaty gamer, you would probably feel whatever latency is here. So remember, if you're a professional player, you'll have to buy a better computer. But for the rest of us, this is an amazing turnout for this game. So after seeing all these results, do I recommend the A380 in 2025? Honestly, if you only have $80 for a graphics card and you insist on buying a newer graphics card that, isn't 8 or 9 years old, it's honestly not that bad of a purchase. It also comes with AV1 support, which could be pretty cool depending on, what you do or your workflow. The biggest downside is going to be those 6 gigs of VRAM, but realistically you aren't going to be pumping enough power out of this thing to even use a lot more memory, so it isn't the end of the world. But in the coming years, we are going to see this card get less and less relevant in the newest AAA games, so just prepare for the future and start saving up for your new PC now. If you don't mind using an older card and you don't really care about power draw, you can always get something like a GTX 1070 Ti or a GTX 1080 for a similar price to this one, and it will outperform it by a huge margin. My name's Jason. Thanks for watching.